We already started. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I think there's a lot of, is it a bit noisy? Or is it just me? Sounds a bit high, maybe bring it down a little bit. So whenever you see that surah up there, you know that we're halfway through, coming towards the end, meaning we're on the other side of Ramadan. And this is how quickly Ramadan runs. Whenever you see the word kahf up there, in any capacity, you know, we're on the, we hit the top of the hill, and now we're kind of rolling down the other side of it, and Ramadan will soon be done, very soon. We'll enter the Ashr al-Awakhir on Tuesday night. So Tuesday night, inshallah, will be for the first night of the last 10 nights, meaning we'll start our tahajjud then, which is not very far away. Today is Wednesday, and less than a week we're going to be starting the last 10 nights. And it's just you start getting anxious when you know Ramadan is ending, and we're not sure if we've done our part or not, and whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has accepted us or not. This is not a good time to lose your motivation and your commitment. This is a time to kind of hold on to it as much as possible. The graph begins to waterfall downwards at this point in the month, in my experience, wallahu alam. But let's enjoy the three surahs that we're going to be talking about today. From Isra to An-Naml, from Isra to An-Naml, which is the largest cluster of surahs in the Quran, talks about carrying the message, the need, what is need, the requirements to doing that, and the obstacles and challenges on the way. And each surah takes an angle and takes a perspective of what is needed to carry this message appropriately and what's going to stand in your way while you do it. And Surah Al-Isra talked about the basic idea of carrying the message being your responsibility, the Quran being the vehicle that you're going to be used in order for you to do that. Surah Al-Kahf talks about the basis on which your civilization is going to be built and the four elements of that. Surah Al-Maryam talks about the unit upon which this civilization is going to be built. What is the unit? Family. Surah Maryam talks about family. It looks at every type of family. It looks at a family where there's a father, a mother, and a child. And then it looks at a family where there's a mother and a son. And a family where there's a son and a father only. And a family where there's just two brothers. And there's like four different families talked about in Surah Maryam. You have Yahya and Zakaria and his mother. And then Maryam and Isa, just a single mother. And then you have Ibrahim and his father, a single father and his son. And then you have Musa and Harun, two brothers alone. So you have all these different types of families, because families do come in different forms. They do come in different forms. Not the forms they're telling people, but they do come in different styles. Not all families are going to be exactly the same, but they do have something in common. There is something that kind of holds a family together that we identify as the norm within this world. So yes, families come in different textures and flavors, but there are boundaries of what that actually looks like in totality. So Surah Al-Maryam talks about that. Talks about the importance of this deen being inherited by one family member down to the other, and the importance of keeping that family together and what that's going to mean. That's why it's a beautiful surah. That's why everyone enjoys it, because it brings forward it brings really that family element into the Quran. And Surah Taha tells you that carrying the message is not designed to make you miserable. The Quran is not designed to make you upset. Carrying the message will give you fulfillment. Carrying the message will allow you to find meaning in life, and it will grant you eternal happiness. So it's not designed to make you upset, meaning the rulings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have in the Quran and within Islam are not there just because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enjoys you not enjoying yourself or wants you not to be able to find joy. It's the opposite. It's the opposite. It's just sometimes that's hard for us to see, because we want certain things and we desire certain things, and we think if someone tells us don't take them, then they don't want us to be happy. That's how children think, by the way, and children are children. But adults know that not everything that you crave and not everything that you desire is actually within your best interest in the long run. And Surah Taha is saying that the Quran was not given to you for you to find misery. And that's the theme of these surahs. Tomorrow we'll go on with the ones that come next. But let's start with Surah Al-Kahf. Let's do number 36. Let's start with the first one.
Bismillah. وما أظن الساعة قائمة ولئن رددت إلى ربي لأجدن خيرا منها منقلبا.
So in Surah Al-Kahf, there are four stories: a story of an idea, a story of wealth, a story of knowledge, and a story of power. And these stories in Surah Al-Kahf only exist in Surah Al-Kahf, meaning they don't exist anywhere else. This is the uniqueness of the surah. That's why you read it every week. Reminds you of what you need, what the elements of building your civilization are going to be. And it tells you stories that don't exist anywhere else in the Quran. The story of Ahl al-Kahf, once in the Quran. The story of the two Ashab al-Jannatain, which is what you just recited, once in the Quran. The story of Musa and al-Khadr, specifically once in the Quran. Yes, Musa comes in the Quran elsewhere, but not this story. And Surah Dhul Qarnayn comes also once in the Quran. So Surah Kahf has forced, and that's the only surah in the Quran that has that. And every surah in the Quran may have a story that's only told in it. It'll be one story. But for a surah to have 4 stories that are only told inside of it, that's very unique. The only surah that has that is Surah Al-Kahf. It's like a trivia question that you can answer and win a prize for. So it's the only surah that has that. And the surah, the story that you just recited, talks about wealth and talks about the perception of possessions and wealth. And the ayah, وَمَا أَظُنُّ السَّاعَةَ قَائِمَةً وَلَئِن رُدِدتُّ إِلَىٰ رَبِّي لَأَجِدَنَّ خَيْرًا مِنْهَا مُنْقَلَبًا. This is the perception and the perspective sometimes of those who live a life of insurance, is what I call it, where they are neither fully indulged, or they're not fully embracing Islam, they're not accepting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fully, I mean, they're not all in, and they're all at the same time, they're not completely disconnected. They have a foot here and a foot there. Like, yani, if there's no akhirah, well, I'm enjoying dunya, and if there's akhirah, I've done enough hopefully to make it. That doesn't work. So this guy who's having a discussion with his friend who's a Muslim or a mu'min or a believer, and he's kind of not, he's more wealthy. He says, this is the wording he says, وَمَا أَظُنُّ السَّاعَةَ قَائِمًا. And I honestly don't think there's going to be hereafter. I just don't think there's going to be one. وَلَئِن رُدِدتُّ إِلَىٰ رَبِّي. But if there is, and I end up going back to my Lord, لَأَجِدَنَّ خَيْرًا مِنْهَا مُنْقَلَبًا. In terms of what I own, I think the Lord will give me better than what I already have. I think He'll give me more. I don't see why He wouldn't. So I believe that if there is an akhirah, and it turns out to be, I'm doing enough. Hopefully He'll give me back more than I actually have. But I honestly don't think there is one. His friend tells him, أَكَفَرْتَ بِالَّذِي خَلَقَكَ مِن تُرَابٍ ثُمَّ مِن نُطْفَةٍ ثُمَّ سَوَّاكَ رَجُلًا. Well, you lost your, this is kufr. This is kufr. You have now disbelieved in God, who created you from the soil of the earth and from sperm and made you a man. And you're saying, I don't think there's akhirah. And if there is, He'll probably give me a lot and He'll give me what I want. No. You can't have it both ways. I know it sounds attractive, but you can't. Either you have to be all in somewhere. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects you to be all in some direction. Choose which direction and go all in. Those who play around, that's what hypocrisy is. That's what nifaq is, somewhere in the middle. Kufr is, I don't believe in any of this. I'm going the route of, this is the only life I have, I'm going to enjoy. And then there's a Muslim who sees the banking in akhirah. The Muslim who believes that the value of everything they do is going to be cashed in on the Day of Judgment, and that their life is dedicated for the sake of the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what they look for, and that's what they care about. And you have to make a choice of what you're going to do in your life. Obviously, Islam is very clear in terms of what you're supposed to be doing, but you have to make that decision. This gentleman here who had a lot of wealth, I don't think there is one. But if there is, then no. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refuses to allow someone to live their life like that, by the way. If you live your life like that, you will be forced to make a decision at some point. Your hand is going to be forced. You're going to have to declare yourself. Are you all in for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or are you going to pull out? Which is it going to be? You're going to be stuck. You're going to be faced with a number of decisions in your life that will establish whether you're in or out. And maybe people don't see it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment will point out for you within your book the times where you were faced with a decision, whether you had to say, I am in or out, and you made either you made it in or you made it out. There's no, I'm not sure, maybe, I don't think so, and if it happens, I'm doing enough to make. No. That doesn't work. You can't play both hands. You can't have one foot here and one foot there and you're balancing it out. Either you understand that there's akhirah, and you understand that you're going to be accountable, and that you're going to be, so you live like that, and that your life reflects the fact that you believe in resurrection, and you believe in responsibility in front of Allah, or you don't. Somewhere in the middle, I'm sorry, doesn't work. And that's the story of that's what wealth does, because wealth makes us a little bit arrogant. We feel a little bit too comfortable. We start wondering whether all of this is even mean. This is what happens. People who don't have a lot, who depend upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for their daily provisions, who understand that, they don't question this stuff. It's the people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them more than they have what they need in abundance, so they don't really think they can sit back. And this has been the story of faith since the beginning of time. If you look in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this leaders, atrafna, alladhina atrafnahum. Those who had a lot, those who had more than they needed, they start questioning stuff like this. Not understanding that they are just as poor and just as in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the person who has nothing, no possessions. Our need for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in every aspect of our lives. It's not just wealth, it's everything else. You breathe, because the breaths we take is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The senses that we use are a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The intellect, the guidance, everything that we have is ata from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He continues to give us on a momentarily basis. And He can just stop at any moment and then we are completely bankrupt. But sometimes wealth will make it hard for you to see, for us to see that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala salama. Let's do 82. Who has 82? No one? Okay.
وأما الجدار فكان لغلامين يتيمين في المدينة وكان تحته كنز لهما وكان أبوهما صالحا فأراد ربك أن يبلغا أشدهما ويستخرجا كنزهما رحمة من ربك وما فعلته عن أمري ذلك تأويل ما لم تسطع عليه صبرا.
So in the story of Musa alayhi salam wal Khidr alayhi salam, when he met him and he was going to learn from him, and of course it's a very symbolic story. I'm not going to go into the depth of it because it'll take the whole time. But what I want to point out is this piece of it, just a wording here. There was a broken wall. It had fallen over. And they had gone to this village where the wall is, and they had asked the villagers for some sustenance, just something to drink and something to eat, and they refused. فَأَبَوْا أَن يُضَيِّفُوهُمَا. They refused to offer them to Musa and Khidr anything. So Khidr, after that, they didn't refuse to offer them anything. He starts rebuilding a wall, just free of charge. He goes and buys whatever is needed, cement and whatever, and he starts rebuilding a wall. And Musa is like, at least we could get paid for this. I mean, they didn't feed us. Might as well ask them for payment. And that's when Khidr said, oh, okay, you don't seem to understand this arrangement here. You're not going to argue with me. You just walk and learn, and that's it. And Musa alayhi salam had objected 3 times because it didn't make sense. There was something wasn't making sense to Musa alayhi salam. There's something he couldn't see, which is the whole point of this story. There's some things your knowledge doesn't go that deep. He didn't understand. Why are we rebuilding this wall in a village where the people are obviously not very well behaved and have very poor manners? They don't deserve our free service. Then he tells them the story. As for the wall, فَكَانَ لِغُلَامَيْنِ يَتِيمَيْنِ فِي الْمَدِينَةِ. It was owned by 2 orphan boys. I wanted to rebuild it because if I didn't, under the wall, there was some wealth, some loot that their father had left for them. And if the wall falls down completely, the villagers, who obviously are very stingy based on their behavior that was already established, they didn't even feed them. If they find wealth that belongs to 2 orphan kids, what do you think they're going to do? Respect the wealth of orphans? The wealth of orphans is going to be gone. They're going to take it for themselves. So I rebuilt it so that they would find this later on in their life older and it'll be theirs. That's the story. Now, why I told this verse is because of 3 words right in the middle of it that I think is worthy of your contemplation. Where he says, alayhi salam, Khidr is telling, وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. And their father was a pious man. The reason that the hand of God, the reason that the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Al-Khidr was going to be to rebuild this wall and preserve the treasure under it for them to find later in life and not have it stolen by the villagers as a natural flow of things would have dictated, meaning the natural flow of things, this wall would have completely fallen over and the villagers would have found the treasure and stole it from the orphans. But the reason that that's going to be broken, the reason that somehow these kids are not going to even know who built the wall, they're going to wonder, they're going to have the discussion, these kids later on in life. Wallah, the wall has fallen over, but one day we came and found the wall was rebuilt. Till this day, we don't know who rebuilt the wall. Right? That's the story going. That's the story they're going to have, and they're going to say, "Subhanallah, they would find out later. Had this wall not been built, we'd have lost everything under it." Well, why? Why did that happen? Why? وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. That's why. Because they had a pious father who passed away, but because it was a good man, he was a man of piety, of closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of khair, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved his children. The best thing you can do for your children in your life is be a good person. That is the number one best thing you can do for your children, is be the best person you can be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you do that, if you take care, if you perform the deeds He created you to perform, if you carry the responsibilities He created you to carry in your life, and khair comes from you at all times, then don't worry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will continue to protect your your offspring and your children, your family, even if they go through difficulties, even if some of them die, even as long as they hold on to their faith, as long as they are not losing their deen and their iman, and they're capable of saying La ilaha illallah, they're preserved. Because you can easily argue with me and say, well, the Prophet ﷺ, what happened to his family after he died was pretty severe. It was pretty severe. Like most of his descendants ﷺ were massacred horribly, with very few people who actually stayed. Well, but they all died with La ilaha illallah on their tongue and in their hearts. And that is that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserves people. And that's what kana abuhuma salihah. I think it's a very, very important thing for us to think about here in the West. Statistically speaking, 3 generations from now, over 55% of the offspring of Muslims today won't be Muslim. Statistically speaking, if we're going to extrapolate from the data that we have from the Christians and the Jews. If we're going to extrapolate from data that we have from people who have been here, we're talking 2nd, 3rd, and 4th generations. A huge drop-off in people who actually still believe in their faith occurs within a few generations. So if we're going to extrapolate from that data, and we're going to say, well, what's going to happen to us if we live here for another generation or 2 or 3? Statistically speaking, it doesn't look that great. And that should scare you. It should. If it doesn't, it should. This is one thing that should keep you up at night a bit. Wondering, are you bringing into the world people who have a high likelihood of maintaining and adhering to La ilaha illallah? Or you're going to produce a generation that all it takes is for you to pass away and maybe your direct descendants for that to be completely lost moving forward. Believe it or not, it is your responsibility to think about these things. It is. You are responsible to making sure that what you're bringing into this world has a very good chance, has all the elements that they need, have all the tools to hold on to La ilaha illallah. And if you're not providing them with that, then you are at fault for doing that. It's a scary thought. But I think we should learn from what happened before. We live in the West. Many of you are 1st generation, some of you are 2nd generation, a few of you are 3rd generation Muslims. I can tell you just from being here for 10 years, which is something that's very scary that I'm saying right now. Subhanallah, in a few months it'll be 10 years. For 10 years, dealing with Muslims from different backgrounds, I can verify that this data is somewhat accurate. Dealing with Muslims in this community from different backgrounds, some who have been here longer than others, I can verify to a certain degree that this data sounds pretty reasonable. I don't feel it's wrong. I feel it's probably correct just based on my observation. When I run into people who are 3rd generation, 2nd generation, or immigrants walking off the boat, or 1st generation, been here for 15 years or more, that there is a problem. So be very careful. وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. You need to put in that effort to make sure that your children find what they're hoping to find, inshallah, moving forward. Okay, let's do, what do I want to do? Oh, Allah al-Musta'an. It's going to be hard. Let's do 12 of Surah Maryam, because we're running out of time.
يا يحيى خذ الكتاب بقوة وآتيناه الحكم صبيا.
Surah Maryam talks about families, as I explained, as a part of carrying this message. You need to make sure that you respect families. And it gives example of 3 or 4 different types of families. A full family, a family of a single mother, Isa alayhi salam and his mother, or a family of a single father like Ibrahim and his dad, or just 2 brothers like Musa and Harun. Or you have all these different families in Surah Maryam that are being told the story of. And in this ayah, in Surah Maryam, it's very unique where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya Yahya, O Yahya, which is John, the son of Zakaria, alayhi salatu wassalam, قَالَ خُذِ الْكِتَابَ بِقُوَّةٍ. Take the book with strength. Take the book forcefully, meaning take it and practice it appropriately. Don't take it in a weak manner. Don't take it where you're 1 foot in, 1 foot out, unclear whether you like it. No, take it and and completely adhere to everything in it. And then he says, وَآتَيْنَاهُ الْحُكْمَ صَبِيًّا. What does hukum mean here? What do you think hukum means? It has nothing to do with ruling, which is the word that we commonly associate with hukum. Hukum is intellect, is critical thinking. Al-muhakama, al-aqliya, the ability to critically think and measure things and actually come and analyze and observe. وَآتَيْنَاهُ الْحُكْمَ صَبِيًّا. He was a sabi. A sabi means he's 10, 11, 9, 12, something like that. He's still a kid. In today's terminology, he's still a child. He's a kid. But we gave him the ability to perform critical thinking at a young age. So the command was خُذِ الْكِتَابَ بِقُوَّةٍ. Take the book of Allah, take the teaching of Allah, take the law of God with strength and adhere to it forcefully. I think that the reason that our children have superficial interests and that they don't take serious things seriously is a product of our malfunctioning as parents. This is us. You can't blame a child for how he turns out, because all a child knows is whatever it is you taught them. A child is just the product of whatever environment you put them in, and whatever it is you fed them, and whatever it is you taught them, whatever it is you helped them to growing up. So to hold a child accountable, to say this generation is this or generation is that, is insane. It's very, forgive me, it's a stupid thing to say. I don't agree with it at all, and I don't like it. Stop talking about the generation, because when you're talking about the generation, you're talking about yourself, because you produced this generation. They didn't produce themselves. They were born. They didn't even have anything to do with that. They had no contribution to that at all. And then whatever they were taught is whatever you taught them. And they grew up in whatever school you put them in, and they watched whatever shows you allowed them to, and they learned whatever issues you allowed them to learn. So how can we possibly blame them? There's nothing to blame. It's crazy. How do you blame a child? How do you blame someone who just turned 20? There's no rationale or logic in doing that. When we're blaming them, we don't like the way they turned out, it's our fault. We didn't do a proper job in making sure that we provide them with all their tools. I find this verse in the Quran to be very meaningful. Ya Yahya, as a child, as a sabi, who was granted a certain degree of critical thinking, not just Yahya alayhi salam, but all children do. Probably the most logical human beings on the planet are younger people. They're extremely logical. If you convince them that this is what they need to do, they will do it. If they're convinced, if it makes sense to them, they'll do it. They'll probably adhere to it more than you will. They'll probably adhere to it more because they're still, to a certain degree, pure. They have that purity to them yet. They have not. They don't understand the greed that you and I understand, and the selfishness and the self-interest. It's not fully clear to them. So if they're convinced this is the right thing to do, they'll do it. And if we're failing to convince them, then that's our problem. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saw that Yahya was worthy of this command. Take the book with strength, ya Yahya. Don't wait until they're 25 or 30. No. As a child, take the book. Practice the book. You're responsible for it. You're a representative of the teachings of this book, oh Yahya, as a sabi, as a child. I think we have chosen to treat our children in a certain way, not for their best interest, but for ours. A child that can critically think can argue with you and can point out your flaws and is more difficult to control. We don't want that. We want obedience. You want obedience. So you keep them small, you keep them young, you keep them naive, you keep them caring about stuff that don't mean anything. It's easier for us to control. This is my belief. Prove me wrong, by all means. I would be nothing would make me happier in this world if the community would prove me wrong, that I'm totally off with my theory here. Because you want a community of, you want the ummah to change, you need to get younger people to take responsibility and take themselves seriously and take their choices seriously earlier in life. That they are free, you have freedom of choice, and this is the amanah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the mountains and the skies and the earth, and they all said no, and you carried it. This is the amanah that you have. This is a God-given right. Here, choose whatever you want. If they understand that and they value their choices and they understand that they're responsible and accountable for their choices, yes, it comes with the risk of some of them making the wrong choice, but that's how you build an ummah. That's how Ali and Zayd and Ja'far and Zubayr and Talha and Anas and Zuhayd ibn Thabit, how do you think these people led armies later? You think they were pampered until they were 20? No. They were made to understand that your choices are valuable. How do you think Aisha became the faqihah of her time? No, not through the way we raise our children. No, I can tell you that. It was very different. They were given responsibility and they were made that their thought process was important, that they had to critically think about things, that they had to question things that didn't make any sense to them. But if they do that, the first people they will question is you. The first person your child will question if you teach them to do that is going to be you. They're going to come back and start asking, why do you do this? Why don't you do that? This seems to be the right thing. Why aren't you doing it? Why are you behaving like this? Why do you treat mom like this? Why do you speak to the dad like this? Why do you cut off your family like this? Why do you keep on speaking about people? I was told it was right. They'll argue with you. And you don't want an argument. You just want obedience. So maybe keep them playing their video games and focus on their stuff their trivial aspect that doesn't, they'll stay young and they'll stay quiet and you'll stay happy. And then the ummah will be lost in a couple of generations. Ya Yahya, khudh al-kitaba biquwwa. Mature people. And make them understand that they're responsible and grant them the book. Let them stand up front for salah. Let them lead. Let them be taught that you are responsible. Let them be given autonomy. Let them be empowered. And let them be held accountable for their mistakes. Let them figure out how they're going to make a difference and feel that they have importance and significance. Yahya was 10 years old. Wallahi, you would easily argue that he didn't have to be a part of this story in the Quran at all. And we would just focus on Zakaria and how happy he was to have a child. No, the focus was going to be on Yahya. And here's the book. Take it with strength. Biquwwa, he told him. And then he pointed out that he was a child. وَآتَيْنَاهُ الْحُكْمَ صَبِيًّا. Wallahi, any word missing from this ayah, I would not have an argument. If he removed any word from this verse, I would have no argument to make for you. But he chose, subhanahu wa ta'ala, his words very carefully here, so that you would know that yes, he was young, and yes, he was a child, and yes, he's being told directly to carry the book, and yes, he had the ability to perform critical thinking. And they do. And if they stop doing it, it's because we made them stop doing it. We told them to accept things that made no sense. If you tell a child to accept something that makes no sense, you do it once, you do it twice, you do it 3 times, you develop a mindset in that child where they accept things that make no sense. And they live like that for a long time. And then that backfires at you later, where they behave in a way that makes no sense. And you ask why? Well, because that's what they were taught to do. You taught them to do it in 1, 2, 3, 4, so they extrapolated and did it in situation 5. It's just situation 5 ended up harming you a little bit or harming them. So either you accept freedom of choice and you accept critical thinking and you inspire and educate and train and teach and guide and accept the risk of some people will make choices that you don't like, or we play it safe and we all lose eventually. Right. Let's do ayah number 59, if you don't mind. Surah Maryam.
فخلف من بعدهم خلف أضاعوا الصلاة واتبعوا الشهوات فسوف يلقون غيا.
So in Surah Maryam also, after the stories of the different families, after the story of Yahya and his son Zakaria and his wife, Zakaria and his wife and his son, the story of Maryam and her only child as a single mother, and the story of Ibrahim and his father, single father, and the story of Musa and Harun, and the story of the family of Ismail, and the aloneness of Idris alayhi salam, looking at all these different ways of living in this world. Right after that, he says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَخَلَفَ مِن بَعْدِهِمْ خَلْفٌ. And then, descendant from them was another group of people, khalf. They lost what they were supposed to inherit from their parents. This verse is scary because it's telling us the problem. If people stop taking the time to educate their youth appropriately, and to make sure that this deen is handed down from one generation to the other. That's our job. My job is, if I was handed this deen, that I hand it to as many people as humanly possible so they can carry the beacon moving forward. But if at some point one generation decides not to do that, or doesn't do that with the full force of their abilities and willpower and manpower even, then فَخَلَفَ مِن بَعْدِهِمْ خَلْفٌ. Then one generation will come after. And instead of Islam expanding and people expanding in knowledge and expanding in practice, it starts to go the opposite way. And it starts to decline. And that's the fear. The fear is if Islam starts to decline instead of spreading outwards. If you think about it, the Prophet ﷺ, one person, and then the Sahaba, and the Tabi'een, and the Tabi'een, and the circle was getting bigger and bigger, and more scholars, and more knowledge, and more rulings, and more fiqh, and more books, and more collaboration, and bigger communities got bigger and bigger and bigger because people kept on making sure that this deen was being handed down to the next generation appropriately and taught and trained and aided and supported and mentored and guided. And then if you don't do that, it starts to get smaller. And once it starts getting smaller, it's just a matter of time before, that's Yawm al-Qiyamah. That's how Yawm al-Qiyamah happens. When we stop being able to do this and the circle starts getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and the next generation doesn't carry what we carried. And they know less, and they understand Islam less, and they're adhering to La ilaha illallah less, and they love it less. And then you know we're on the wrong. فَخَلَفَ مِن بَعْدِهِمْ خَلْفٌ أَضَاعُوا الصَّلَاةَ. They took their salah lightly. They lost it. They stopped adhering to it. وَاتَّبَعُوا الشَّهَوَاتِ. And they followed their whims and desires. فَسَوْفَ يَلْقَوْنَ غَيًّا. And they will find punishment. إِلَّا مَن تَابَ وَآمَنَ. So it's important. Surah Maryam reminds us of the importance of doing our job, of making sure the next generation is being handed this down appropriately. There will come one generation that won't do it. And they will lose their prayers, Ada'u Salah, and they'll follow their whims and desires to do what they want, and this will all be lost. The Prophet ﷺ in the Sahih, he tells us about certain aspects of what happens right before the Day of Judgment. And amongst the narrations we have is that he says ﷺ, a day will come right before Yawm al-Qiyamah where لا يقول أحد الله الله. No one will use his name anymore. فإذا قال أحد لا إله إلا الله, the word لا إله إلا الله comes up, يقول كان أبي أو جدي يقولها. Yes, I think I heard my grandparents say it. Hadith and Abi Dawood. I think I heard like one of my aunts, one of my old timers. They used to say, I said something like, I don't know, what you said, I don't know. But no one else, it's gone. Knowledge is gone, and adherence is gone, and that's it. There's nothing left anymore. There's no inheritance, there's no guidance, nothing is being handed down. I always tell my brothers and sisters, if you're young and you have the intention, the ability, memorize the Quran and then go get an ijazah. Go get a sanad. Because when you have the sanad, you can read it, and whenever you feel down, you can read the sanad and make you feel better. Because the sanad, when you read the sanad, what the sanad is just a chain of narration. So you say, قرأت القرآن على شيخي, who recited in his turn the Quran on his sheikh, who recited it on his sheikh. And we do this every once in a while whenever someone's getting a sanad, because you count the people back to the Prophet ﷺ, who took it from Jibreel, who took it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. This chain, this continuous chain of one person handing the Quran down. And I'm not just talking about the tajweed rulings, as important as they are. I'm talking about the whole concept, the whole law, the practice, the mentality, the perspective, the worldview, the values, the principles being handed down from one generation to the other, making sure that when we pass away, this generation is capable of continuing this message and this legacy better than we did, fixing our making sure that we didn't leave them a mess, and that they're not going to fall into the same mistakes that we have been falling in time and time again. That's what our job, that's what we have to do. Anything short of that is taqsir, is us short, falling short. Anything, and we will be held accountable for that. And that's why I think Surah Maryam is important. That's why I think we enjoy it, because the concept of family is just very strong in it. Okay, we're running out of time. Let's do 12 of Surah Taha.
إني أنا ربك فاخلع نعليك إنك بالوادي المقدس طوى.
Yeah, Surah Taha tells us the Quran is not here to make you miserable. It wasn't descended upon you so that you always find difficulty and that you're always struggling. No. The Quran is here to actually give you fulfillment. It will give you ease. It will give you a life of satisfaction. Yes, on the way there's going to be challenges and difficulties, but that's the price you pay to get this satisfaction and find this ease and then find full happiness on the Day of Judgment. You have to pay a little bit of a price for that in dunya. I mean, you have to put yourself through some difficulties, but it wasn't designed for you to be upset. Meaning it wasn't put together with the intention of making sure that you were always going to be unhappy and sad and nothing's working out for you and you're always deprived of stuff that you like. That's not what it's there for. It's there for the opposite of it. And it tells a story at the beginning of it of Surah Musa, of Musa alayhi salam meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the form of being given the 10 Commandments and hearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the first time. So he would come to the place he was called to come in Tur Sinai, where between Egypt and the Holy Land. And he would come by, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would call upon him and say, Inni ana rabbuk, indeed I am your Lord. فَاخْلَعْ نَعْلَيْكَ, take your shoes off. إِنَّكَ بِالْوَادِ الْمُقَدَّسِ طُوَى, you're in the sacred valley of Tuwa. You're going to come to a place that is sacred. Take your shoes off. I always found that, I love this verse because I could never figure out, it's symbolic. It's like, Musa, don't come with luggage. Don't come with the luggage of your dunya. Take it off. Leave it outside. You're coming to the sacred valley of Tuwa to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So take it off outside. Understand that idea? It's not the concept. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can only pray with your shoes on. No, because in Islam you can pray with your shoes on. But the symbolism in it is what Musa alayhi salam understood. فَاخْلَعْ نَعْلَيْكَ, because all of the dunya that you carry, it's right where your feet should be. Meaning it's worthless. It's similar to what your shoes are. Dunya is not worthy enough to be carried on your head or on your shoulders or in your heart. You carry it on your feet, and that's not even what it deserves to be. It doesn't even deserve to be with your feet because it's worthless. Dunya and whatever possessions you hold on to is similar to your shoes. And even then, he is told, take them off. You're going to come and speak to me, Ya Musa, take them off outside. Indeed, I'm your Lord. Come in, but take your shoes off outside. So he did, alayhi salam. He entered understanding that he's coming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dunya has to be behind you. And I find the same concept exists when you pray. When you do takbir and you put your hands and you throw, it's almost like you're throwing something behind your head. It's almost like you're carrying something and you're just throwing it behind you. And this is really the symbolism and the movements that we make in salah. It's like you're standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Get rid of whatever it is you're carrying, because nothing matters. Nothing matters when you're speaking to God himself. And if anything does matter, then just tell it to him, because there's no point of carrying it on your own. You were never designed to carry it on your own to begin with. So if it matters that much, then take it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it doesn't matter, then throw it behind you. Every time we make takbir, that's the movement that we make. And I find that verse just to be very, very, very meaningful. وَأَنَا اخْتَرْتُكَ, he tells him, and I have chosen you. فَاسْتَمِعْ لِمَا يُوحَى. So listen very carefully to what is going to be revealed to you. So what did he tell him? قَالَ إِنَّنِي أَنَا اللَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. He told him, indeed, I am Allah. لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنَا. There is no God worthy of worship or service but me. فَاعْبُدْنِي, so serve me. وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ لِذِكْرِي. And salah came there immediately. And establish your prayer so that you continue to remember me. Because I can't have you forgetting about me throughout your day. I can't have you remembering me once a week or once a month or every Eid or something. You have to remember me daily. This connection that you and I are going to start having is going to be something that goes on all the time. We are very fortunate that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to speak to us 5 times a day. He wants our communication with him 5 times a day. It's not a burden. It's an opportunity. It's a gift. Here you get to speak to Allah 5 times a day. 5 dedicated appointments that have been assigned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you to meet with him. And then if you want to meet any other time, he's available as well. But these are 5 assigned appointments to have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِنَّ السَّاعَةَ آتِيَةٌ أَكَادُ أُخْفِيهَا لِتُجْزَى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ بِمَا تَسْعَى فَلَا يَصُدَّنَّكَ عَنْهَا مَنْ لَا يُؤْمِنُ بِهَا وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ فَتَرْدَى. And indeed, the final hour, Yawm al-Qiyamah, is coming. I keep it hidden so that everyone will be compensated based on what they did. So don't let those who followed their desires and followed their whims drive you away from it and make you forget about it and distract you from the importance of preparing for that day. And these are the words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala started his conversation with Musa alayhi salam. And I think they're very meaningful. I'll end with that. We didn't get very far. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك لا إله إلا أنت استغفرك وأتوب إليك وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. جزاكم الله خيرا. بارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله